Can a marriage be saved before it's too late? Hello everyone, in this video, I will be sharing what married life looks like after the age of 55. As couples grow older, many realize that their relationship is no longer the same as it once was. This emotional distance doesn't happen in an instant. It is the result of years of unspoken words, unmet needs, and missed moments. The breakdown of a marriage is not always due to a loss of love. Sometimes it happens because the way love is expressed no longer feels right. Women, after spending years nurturing their families, may begin to feel exhausted, unappreciated, or simply outgrow the marriage while their husbands remain unchanged. So, why do so many women start feeling distant from their husbands as they age? And more importantly, is there a way to rekindle love before it's too late? Join me as we explore the reasons behind this growing emotional gap and the steps that can be taken to preserve a lasting marriage. Stay with me through these 8 real-life stories to understand why women tend to drift away from their husbands in their later years. Story 1. The emotional burden becomes overwhelming. For decades, women have often taken on the role of caregivers within the family. They remember anniversaries, plan family gatherings, track the health of their loved ones, and manage everything from daily meals to major life decisions for their children. Many wives accept this responsibility as a natural part of marriage, but at some point, they realize they are carrying too much, while their husbands don't even notice. Linda, 60, was a devoted wife who always put her husband and children first. For years, she was the silent manager of the household, handling everything from paying bills and scheduling doctor's appointments to organizing vacations. Her husband, Harry, loved her deeply, but saw these responsibilities as just part of marriage. He never questioned who prepared the meals or ensured that everything at home ran smoothly. However, as Linda got older, she began to feel exhausted. It felt as though she was handling everything while Harry simply existed in the marriage without actively contributing. As the years went by, the exhaustion piled up. By the time she turned 61, Linda started asking herself, "Why do I have to carry all of this alone while my husband doesn't take on the same level of responsibility?" She no longer wanted to remind him about appointments, nor did she want to bear the weight of running the household alone. This imbalance created emotional distance, not because she stopped loving him, but because she felt abandoned within her own marriage. Many men fail to recognize that their wives' care and dedication are not obligations, but acts of love. As women age, they want to feel genuine partnership, not just passive presence. If a husband does not actively change, share responsibilities, and show appreciation, his wife's love may quietly fade over time. Lesson learned. Marriage should never be one-sided. If a husband wants to preserve the love in his marriage, he must actively participate in family life, share the burdens with his wife, and most importantly, acknowledge and appreciate everything she has done throughout the years. A simple thank you or a small act of care can make all the difference in keeping a relationship strong. Story 2. Lack of meaningful communication. When Susan and Robert first got married, they could talk for hours without ever getting bored. They shared everything, their dreams for the future, the little moments of their day, and their deepest thoughts about life. These conversations made Susan feel understood, cared for, and most importantly, loved. But over time, the conversations became less frequent. Instead of deep, meaningful discussions, their exchanges were reduced to short conversations about dinner, bills, or other mundane topics. Susan tried to maintain their connection by asking about his day, but Robert's responses became increasingly brief. It was fine. Nothing special. Or sometimes just a nod, without even looking up from the TV. Susan realized that despite having her husband by her side, she still felt incredibly alone. The warm evening talks were gone, and deep conversations had disappeared. She wanted to share her thoughts, but every attempt was met with indifference. Eventually, she stopped trying, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew no one was really listening. She started to feel invisible in her own marriage. Robert was physically there, yet the emotional distance between them grew wider each day. There were no major fights, no explosive arguments, just an endless silence that made her feel like a shadow in her own home. Lesson learned. Communication is not just about words. It's about listening and understanding. When one person feels unheard and unappreciated, they will gradually withdraw, causing an emotional disconnect in the marriage. A strong relationship doesn't require grand speeches, but it does require both partners to be truly present and engaged with each other. Story 3. The never-ending burden of housework. At 65, Helen had hoped that retirement would bring peace and relaxation alongside her husband. After a lifetime of working and caring for her family, she dreamed of finally being able to rest, enjoying slow mornings with a cup of tea and quiet afternoons reading her favorite books. But reality turned out to be far different from what she had imagined. Every day, Helen still had to wake up early to prepare breakfast, clean the house, do the grocery shopping, cook meals, and handle the laundry. Meanwhile, her husband, John, sat comfortably on the couch, watching TV or scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of everything she was doing. To him, housework had always been a woman's responsibility. Even in retirement, Helen's role in the household remained unchanged. She continued to manage everything while John simply enjoyed his leisure. At first, Helen tried to be patient. She thought, maybe he just doesn't realize. If I remind him, he'll help. But when she asked him to wash the dishes, he responded, I'll do it later. Let me finish this show first. When she asked him to sweep the floor, he sighed and said, Why don't you just do it? It'll be faster. These dismissive responses slowly made Helen realize that he had never intended to share the responsibilities with her. Day by day, Helen's exhaustion grew, not just physically, but emotionally. She no longer felt like John's life partner, but more like an unpaid housekeeper. Every time she saw him relaxing while she was still running around handling chores, frustration built up inside her. Over time, that frustration turned into resentment. She found herself asking, I spent my whole life taking care of this family, so why, in the end, do I still not get a single day of rest? Lesson learned. Marriage is not just about love. It's about sharing responsibilities. When one person carries the entire burden while the other simply enjoys the benefits, resentment will inevitably grow over time. Sharing household duties isn't just about making life easier. It's about showing respect and appreciation for each other. If one partner feels ignored or undervalued, love can slowly fade away, leaving only frustration and disappointment. Story 4. She changed, but he didn't. At 65, Alice felt like she was entering a new chapter of life, a stage where she could finally explore the things she had always wanted to do but never had the time for. After years of taking care of her family and working, she longed to enjoy life on her own terms. Taking painting classes, reading more books, trying out new hobbies, and most of all, traveling to places she had never been. But her husband, David, didn't share the same mindset. He was perfectly content with their life as it had always been, sitting in his favorite chair, watching the news, taking a short walk around the neighborhood, and returning home for his evening tea. To him, old age was a time to slow down and rest, not to try new things. Whenever Alice suggested, let's go on a trip somewhere new, or "Would you like to join me in a painting class?" He would shake his head and reply, "I'm used to this life. You go ahead if you want, but I'm not interested." At first, Alice tried to convince him to join her, but she eventually realized that she couldn't force someone to change if they didn't want to. So she started doing things alone, attending painting classes by herself, reading in a cafe by herself, and planning solo trips to new places. The more she pursued her passions, the more distant they became. Dinner, which was once filled with conversation, grew quiet because they were now walking on separate paths. Alice never wanted to drift away from her husband, but every time she excitedly shared her new experiences, David would only nod indifferently. She started feeling as if, despite living under the same roof, they were no longer truly connected. Lesson learned. Marriage isn't just about growing old together, it's about growing together. If one person is eager to move forward while the other refuses to change, the gap between them will only widen. A lasting relationship requires companionship, adaptability, and a willingness to embrace new experiences together. Story 5. Losing both physical and emotional intimacy. When they were younger, Emily and George shared small but meaningful gestures of affection. Every morning he would hold her hand while they drank coffee together, give her a gentle hug before bed, and exchange kind, loving words throughout the day. These gestures were never grand, but they made Emily feel cherished and appreciated. However, over time, those little moments began to disappear. The hand-holding stopped, loving words became scarce, and physical intimacy faded. George was still there, but he no longer expressed affection the way he once did. At first, Emily thought it was just a temporary shift, something that would pass. But as days turned into months, the emotional and physical distance between them only grew. She tried to rekindle the closeness they once had. She initiated hugs, started warm conversations, and made an effort to bring back intimacy. But George responded with indifference. One evening she asked him, "Do you still find me attractive like you used to?" He simply chuckled without answering. That silence hurt her more than any words ever could. Slowly, Emily withdrew. She stopped expecting affection from her husband, afraid of feeling disappointed. They still shared the same bed, yet she had never felt lonelier. George didn't realize that the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Emily came to understand that even though they lived under the same roof, their hearts no longer beat in sync the way they once did. Lesson learned. Intimacy in marriage is not just about physical closeness. It's about emotional connection in everyday moments. When a person no longer feels loved or valued, they begin to withdraw from the relationship. Marriage should never be taken for granted. It needs to be nurtured through small, consistent gestures of care and affection. If intimacy is neglected, love can slowly fade without either partner realizing it, until it's too late. Story 6. Retirement doesn't always go as expected. For years, Margaret had envisioned a joyful retirement. She imagined having more time with her husband, Henry, traveling together, exploring new hobbies, and enjoying a life free from the stresses of work. But when retirement finally arrived, things didn't go as she had hoped. Instead of embracing this new chapter with enthusiasm, Henry had no plans for himself. He spent most of his time at home, watching TV, reading the newspaper, or aimlessly wandering around the house with nothing to do. Worse, he started relying on Margaret for everything, from meals and household chores to the smallest daily tasks. At first, Margaret thought that helping him a little was just part of the adjustment period. But over time, she realized that she no longer had a single moment to herself. She was still taking care of Henry, as if she had never retired. Her days revolved around looking after him, while her own desires and personal goals were pushed aside. She had once wanted to join a yoga class, learn to paint, or simply spend quiet afternoons reading. But every time she tried to do something for herself, Henry would call on her for something, making her feel like she could never step away from her responsibilities. The frustration grew inside her. She didn't feel free. She felt trapped in a marriage that no longer allowed her the independence she longed for. Lesson learned. Retirement shouldn't mean complete dependence on a spouse. For a happy retirement, both partners need their own space, hobbies, and a sense of independence. If one person carries all the responsibilities while the other passively enjoys the benefits, marriage can become a burden rather than a time of fulfillment. Story 7. No longer heard or appreciated Carol, 73, was once a woman who loved to share her thoughts. She believed that a happy marriage was built on open communication, where both partners could talk freely about their feelings, thoughts, and daily experiences. But, over the years, she slowly realized that whenever she spoke, Richard no longer truly listened. At first, when she tried to talk about her day, her worries, or even small joys, Richard would respond with short, indifferent replies, sometimes not even looking up from his newspaper or the television. If she expressed concerns about something, he would dismiss them as unnecessary worries. If she tried to have a serious conversation, he would quickly change the subject or show little interest. At first, Carol tried harder. She thought maybe he was just preoccupied and didn't realize how important listening was. But as time passed, she realized that nothing changed. Their conversations became less frequent. She spoke less, and eventually she stopped sharing altogether. Carol no longer told Richard about the books she read, the emotions she felt when she saw an elderly couple holding hands on the street, or her fears about aging in the future. She still fulfilled her responsibilities as a wife, cooking, cleaning, attending family gatherings with him. But deep inside, she knew her love for him was beginning to fade. Lesson learned. When a wife stops sharing, it's often a sign that her love is fading. Listening isn't just about hearing words. It's about showing care and appreciation. A strong marriage doesn't need grand gestures or fancy words. Sometimes all it takes is for two people to genuinely listen to each other, making sure their partner still feels valued and loved. Story 8. Realizing life is too short. Betty, 75, had never thought much about mortality until she lost her childhood best friend. They had shared a lifetime of memories, laughter, and struggles. But in just a short battle with illness, her dear friend was gone, leaving an emptiness that Betty couldn't shake. Her friend's passing was a cruel reminder of life's fragility. It forced Betty to pause and ask herself, "Am I truly happy? And, am I living the life I truly want?" She had never questioned these things before. Her life had always revolved around taking care of her family, making sure everything ran smoothly. She was so used to putting everyone else's needs first, especially her husband Paul, that she had forgotten about herself somewhere along the way. Betty began to recall the dreams of her youth, the places she once longed to visit, the things she had wished to do. But instead of pursuing them, she had spent her entire life prioritizing others. And now, when she looked at Paul, she saw a man who continued living exactly as he always had, unaware of the awakening happening within her. She wasn't angry. She didn't blame him. But deep down, she knew she could no longer live a life that didn't feel fulfilling. And so she began to withdraw, not with fights or resentment, but with quiet acceptance. She spent more time alone, read more books, took more walks, and sought out the peace she had long neglected. Lesson learned. Sometimes change in a marriage doesn't come from fights or conflicts, but from an inner realization. When a woman understands that life is too short to continue living in quiet resignation, she will choose the path that brings her the most peace, even if that means stepping away from what was once familiar. Lesson learned of 8 story: Is marriage still worth fighting for? Marriage is a long journey filled with challenges, and it doesn't always maintain the warmth it had in the beginning. When a woman begins to withdraw from the relationship, it's not necessarily because she has stopped loving her husband. It's because she no longer feels loved and valued. But is marriage still worth fighting for? The answer depends on both partners. If there is still care, if there is still a desire to be together, then absolutely, marriage is worth saving. But this requires real change from both sides. Conversations must become more honest, understanding must take priority over old habits, and love must be nurtured every day, no matter how many years have passed. However, there are times when a relationship has become so distant that it can no longer be repaired. In such cases, letting go is not a failure. It is a way for both individuals to rediscover themselves. A happy marriage is not just about staying together. It is about both people feeling whole and fulfilled in the relationship.